So now let me introduce you this evening to Jason Kaufman. He is the Director of Archives and Records Management for Mennonite Church USA. He is responsible for preserving and providing access to the historical records of the denomination. He serves on the management board for the Global Anabaptist Mennonite Encyclopedia Online and is Vice President for Michiana Anabaptist Historians. Jason was a 2005 graduate of Goshen College and earned a doctorate in history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2015. More recently, he achieved certification from the Academy of Certified Archivists. Jason attends Assembly Mennonite Church in Goshen, Indiana. He and his wife, Lisa, have 3 children. Their ages are 9, 6, and 3. The evening is yours, Jason.
All right, I'm going to make sure I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, Audrey, for that introduction, and thanks to you and Sandra and the rest of Tour Imagination for organizing these virtual archives tours. I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Mennonite Church USA archive, kind of give you an introduction to the archives and tell you some stories that come from some of our collections. Right now, I am sitting in our reading room in the archives, which is located in Elkhart, Indiana. I am pretty sure I'm the only person in the building right now, both because it's 8 o'clock and because most of the staff in the building have been working remotely for the last several months because of COVID-19. So I have the building to myself tonight. I'm going to share my screen really quickly because I want to start by giving you a quick introduction to the archives, a little bit of background on its history and some more information about our collections and some of the research tools that we have available. Okay, I think I have it. So our name, the Mennonite Church USA Archives, is fairly new. It dates to only less than 20 years ago when Mennonite Church USA was created through the merger of the Old Mennonite Church and the General Conference Mennonite Church. But our collections have a much longer history, dating to 1937, when the archives was founded by the Historical Committee of the Old Mennonite Church. The archives were originally housed in the basement of the Goshen College Library, and then they were later moved to the Newcomer Center on the edge of campus in 1959. And so that's the building that you can see in this picture. The archives were located in that longtime home up until 2017, just a few years ago, when they were moved to the current location in Elkhart. So just scroll through a few pictures from the past of the archives. Here are 2 of the longtime directors of the archives, Melvin Gingrich and then Leonard Gross, who's on the right, pictured there with J.C. Wenger. A couple pictures of the historical committee, which kind of oversaw the work of the archives. The one on the top left is from 1960, and then the other one is from 2001, right around the time when MCUSA was created. And then, as I mentioned, we moved the collections to Elkhart in 2017, and I started working here in 2016. So my first job as director of the archives was to plan and carry out the move of all of our collections from Goshen to Elkhart. And so these are a few pictures from that process. A lot of our boxes, we had outgrown our space, and so we were storing them in empty dorm rooms that were no longer being used by the college above the West Lawn Dining Hall. And so that's a picture of what one of the storage rooms looked like. All the boxes were stacked on top of each other. This is the space that we retrofitted to accommodate the archives. Before the construction was complete. This is what became the storage area. And you can see all those nice windows in the back that we had to cover up because we can't expose the documents to sunlight. And then a few pictures of the actual move, which took place in March 2017. It took about a week for us to move all of our boxes. There were between 6,000 and 7,000 boxes. And so it was kind of a fun logistical challenge for me to make sure that none of the boxes got lost between Goshen and Elkhart. And these are the boxes getting ready to be put on the new shelves. And then this is what the entrance to the reading room looks like. We're in the lower level of the Mennonite Church USA denominational building. And then this is the finished product, all the boxes on the shelves. So collection strengths, we have over 1,000 different personal manuscript collections, most of them dating from 1850s to the present. We also have the institutional records of the old Mennonite Church and all of its agencies, such as the Mennonite Board of Missions and the Mennonite Board of Education. We also have significant collections from a variety of inter-Mennonite organizations, including we're the official repository for the records of the Mennonite World Conference and the Africa Inter-Mennonite Mission. And so if you watched John Ross' presentation a few weeks ago about the history of the global Anabaptist movement, a lot of our collections kind of help document the rapid growth of the global Anabaptist Mennonite Church over the last century. Some other collection strengths include conference records and congregational records, mostly for churches in the Midwest United States, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. And then just quickly want to mention a few research tools in case you're interested in exploring our collections further. We have, the place to start, I would say, is our website, the Mennonite Church USA Archives website, and there's a link there, and hopefully Sandra can provide a link to you as well if you're interested. But the website has links for all of the different tools that are available to researchers. So there's a link that will take you to our collection of our scanned photographs that you can search by keyword. The other two that I wanted to mention is the Mennonite Archival Information Database. We recently joined as a partner of that consortium, which was created and originated in Canada, mostly from Mennonite archives and libraries in Canada. But we, along with Goshen College, Bethel College, and the Pacific Northwest Mennonite Historical Society, joined as partners this year. And so that's where you can find information about all of our collections. And then I also wanted to mention another project, collaborative project that I'm working on called Anabaptist History Today. I'm working on that with 15 other Mennonite libraries and archives in the United States and Canada. And the goal for that project is to document the stories of people who identify as Anabaptist during 2020, the momentous events of 2020, and on into next year and beyond. And so we're kind of seeing it, using it as a pilot project to explore what collaboration might look like between Mennonite archives and libraries going forward into the future. So if you have, I encourage you to check out the website, and if you are inspired, you can submit a story or an image or a video that reflects or kind of captures some of your experiences during this year. So hopefully I didn't take too long with that, because I want to have some time to talk about some of the actual stories that emerge from some of our collections in the archives. The topic that I'm going to cover tonight is Mennonite Relief Pioneers. And so I'm going to be looking at some of the stories from our collections from individuals that were mostly connected to the old Mennonite Church, who served abroad. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the, okay, sorry. So who served abroad in the years leading up to 1920 and the creation of the Mennonite Central Committee. And so just to give you a little bit of context, I won't spend too much time on this, but there weren't a lot of kind of coordinated or intentional efforts on the part of Mennonite communities in North America to engage in international relief efforts until the second half of the 19th century. And so the one that was kind of the first experience for a lot of Mennonites in North America was the process of resettling the first wave of Russian and Prussian Mennonites who migrated to the United States and Canada in the 1870s and 1880s. And so I've got a picture of John Funk there on this slide, who was an important leader in that process and was in touch with a lot of the different Mennonite communities across North America and in Russia. And then there were some kind of smaller, more piecemeal efforts at relief work, mostly within the United States in the 1880s and 1890s. And then in the 1890s, you have the first foreign missions that were established in India by three different Mennonite groups: the Old Mennonite Church, General Conference, and the Mennonite Brethren Church. And these missions that were established in India were actually at the beginning in response, they were relief efforts in response to the widespread and prolonged famines that were happening in India in the 1890s. And so they started as relief efforts to provide aid for people who were affected by those, the millions of people who were affected by those. And they later developed into long-term missions. And then the part that I want to focus on mostly during this presentation is the period from between 1914 and 1920. And so obviously World War I was a major catalyst for Mennonite relief efforts. And so between 1914 and 1920, you had a variety of different Mennonite-related communities that were creating organizations to respond to the needs for relief in places like Russia and France and Syria and Turkey. And so those are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on mostly tonight. I won't spend too much more time on that, but between in that period between 1914 and 1920, you had all of these different efforts that were going on, but there wasn't a lot of coordination between these different Mennonite groups. They were communicating with each other and aware of what each group was doing, but there wasn't a lot of intentional effort to try to pool resources or collaborate. And so that changed in the summer of 1920 when there was a delegation of Russian Mennonites who came to the United States and Canada to urge Mennonites to organize to provide relief to the Mennonite communities in Russia who had experienced persecution and were continuing to experience persecution under the Bolshevik government in Russia. So the organization that I'm going to focus on is the Mennonite Relief Commission for War Sufferers, which was created in 1917, and it was mostly an old Mennonite endeavor, and they focused their work in three different areas. One was Reconstruction work in France, the other was relief work in Syria and Turkey, mostly working in orphanages, and then the last one was investigating opportunities to establish a relief program to aid Russian Mennonites. The president of the Relief Commission was Aaron Lukes. You can see him pictured there. And then the rest of the officers are listed underneath him. So the a little bit of context for the Mennonite relief workers who went to France after World War I. This effort was established with the Relief Commission's involvement and support, but it was also largely something that happened through the initiative of young Mennonite conscientious objectors who'd been living in military camps because they had refused to perform military service during World War I. And so some of these Mennonite COs got in touch with people from the American Friends Service Committee, which had been sending COs to France for Reconstruction work since September 1917. And so there were a few Mennonites who ended up going to France before the end of the war, which was in November 1918. But after the armistice, dozens more ended up going to France. And so there were actually 54 Mennonites in total who served in France. And before they went to France, they had to go to Haverford, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, to get their paperwork and passports in order and to do some training to prepare for the work. And many they spent several weeks there, and many also ended up harvesting crops for local Quaker farmers or volunteering in local hospitals, which coincidentally at the time were overcrowded because of a new surge of influenza cases in the fall of 1918. So some of them were working in hospitals to kind of help out with that. The first group of Mennonites sailed for France on October 31st, 1918, and more joined them in the following months. And so all of them ended up going to Paris first to wait for their assignments. And most ended up working in the region between Paris and Verdun, one of the places that had suffered the most destruction as a result of the war. A few also worked further south in the Jura Mountains near France's border with Switzerland. And so they had access to the timber there and worked in sawmills to build the sections of houses that they would ship north for the relief workers to put together closer to Verdun. So you can see some pictures here of that some of the relief workers documented of the destruction. This picture on the left is empty shell casings, and it looks like they're piled. You can see a person right up there in the foreground, and so they look like they're piled like 20 feet high. And so the other one on the right is a photo of, I think, if I remember correctly, a crater that was created as a result of a mine explosion. So what work did they do when they were there? So I mentioned that some were working in sawmills to create the sections of the houses. You can see one of the houses that they were kind of prefabricated houses there. One of the houses there is that they built on the right. Other people were working with kind of transportation and supply logistics work, driving shipments of supplies to different work camps and things like that. Another worker named George Springer, who you can see pictured here, was kind of ended up being a mechanic for the fleet of vehicles that the AFCS and the Red Cross were using to do their work. And so he ended up taking a lot of photographs. He was a big car enthusiast, and so ended up taking pictures of the automobiles and motorcycles that he worked on while he was there. And so those are all in the archives. Besides the work that they did, they had opportunities to kind of travel around and do some sightseeing. And so there are some photos of that. The one on the right is some of the Mennonite COs posing or modeling the German uniforms, military uniforms. And so I think George Springer is the one there on the left. You can see it says "me" underneath it. A lot of the COs were working alongside German war prisoners. And so they got to know them really well. And a lot of the Mennonites could speak German. And so they were at an advantage and didn't have that language barrier. The young Mennonites who went to France also spent a lot of time talking about the current state of the Mennonite Church and also critiquing some of its leaders. One well-known example is Jacob Conrad Meyer, who is pictured there on the right. He was sent to 3 different military camps as a conscientious objector. And while he was there, he decided on his own that he wanted to serve in France through the American Friends Service Committee. And he was one of the main people that was responsible for organizing the Claremont Conference, which brought together all of the Mennonites serving in France in June 1919. And at the end of the conference, they produced a list of priorities for the Church of the Future. And they drafted a constitution and elected an executive committee to provide leadership for what came to be known as the Young People's Conference. And so this was kind of, Meyer and his fellow relief workers represented kind of a new generation of Mennonites who believed that the church should be taking or adopting a more outward focus in the world. And one of their key priorities was that they wanted the Mennonite church to take a stronger emphasis or place a stronger emphasis on service and relief to those in need. And so that was one of the reasons why one of the main reasons why many of them ended up going to France. They wanted to kind of put action or take action instead of just, saying what they believe, to actually show it through their actions. And so Meyer and some of his fellow workers foresaw this need before many of the church leaders at that time, and it actually caused quite a bit of conflict. And so there's a lot more that I could say about Meyer and some of the men who served in France, but I want to make sure I have time to talk about the work that was being done in Syria and Turkey. This is a copy of the report that they produced and distributed after the Claremont Conference. Near East relief. So this relief effort was happening around the same time as the Reconstruction work in France. And the Relief Commission originally hoped to establish an independent Mennonite relief and mission program there. But once they got there to investigate, they discovered that there were already a lot of other organizations working there. And so they ended up sending relief workers under Near East Relief, which was an organization that was already established. So Near East Relief operated a network of orphanages to take in mostly Armenian children whose parents were killed by Turkish military forces. The Armenian genocide that occurred during and after World War I was part of a longer history of violent ethnic conflict between mostly Christian Armenians and mostly Muslim Turks. And so here are some images that some of the relief workers captured of refugees arriving at or traveling on foot to a refugee camp. There's a camp there on the left, and then there's meals being provided to refugee children on the right. A lot of really striking and sad images. Once the children arrived at the orphanage, they were cared for, and if they needed medical attention, they got that. And the orphanages also provided education and training in practical trades such as sewing and weaving for the girls. You can see that pictured on the right. And then carpentry or agriculture for boys. And so the idea was to equip the children with trade skills that they could use when they left the orphanage so that they could survive and make a living. Orphans stayed under their care until they were reunited with family members, or once they reached the age of 16, they were kind of on their own. 31 total Mennonites served with Near East Relief between 1919 and 1923. And the first 9 sailed from the United States in January 1919. And that first group included Ori Miller, who served as an assistant director in the Beirut district. Out of the 31, only 2 of the people who served were women. The rest were men. One of those women, Nellie Miller Mann, who you can see pictured here, donated her papers to the archives. And luckily for us, Nellie was an excellent photographer. Most of the photographs you see from Near East Relief were ones that she either took or developed for other people. And she also wrote regular and extremely detailed letters to her fiance, Cleo Mann, who was back in the United States. Nellie grew up at Prairie Street Mennonite Church in Elkhart, Indiana, and was a graduate of Goshen College. And she was 24 years old when she left for Syria. She was assigned to work as the administrative assistant for Ray Bender, who was the treasurer for Near East Relief, the main office for Near East Relief in Beirut. And Nellie actually ended up working for 7 different bosses during the 2 years that she was there, which she talked about a little bit in her letters. But working in a kind of a central office, a main communication hub, gave Nellie an opportunity to hear about pretty much everything that was going on with the relief efforts. And she also had the opportunity to visit in person a lot of the stations where orphanages were located that were scattered across Turkey and Syria. This is a picture of a hand-drawn map that Nellie Miller made. It shows all of the different orphanages and stations that Near East Relief was working with. In her letters and during her time there, Nellie witnessed and wrote about many tragic events. For example, after the Turkish government ordered all Christians to leave the country in November 1922, she wrote the following. This is from a letter. The refugee camps in all the coast towns are already full to overflowing. Mr. McAfee just received a letter from Dr. Martin at Alexandretta this morning, telling of the dreadful refugee situation there. And the rains, although they have not started here, have been so bad there that the tents in the camp were half underwater and the cemeteries were washed out so that the dead bodies floated around on the surface of the water. She witnessed similar things in person on many other occasions. This is just one example among many. But she also witnessed many things that gave her renewed hope in mankind. One of her favorite places to visit was the Bird's Nest Orphanage in the city of Sidon on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. There, she formed a special bond with Maria Jacobsen, who was a Danish missionary that was who directed the orphanage. According to Nellie, Jacobsen had a special gift for connecting with the children under her care. In a letter from 1923, she wrote the following. I have seen many children transformed under Miss Jacobsen's love. Most of these babies were mere lumps of humanity with no expression and no vitality. One little boy, especially Ibrahim, was the dullest and most languid of them all. He couldn't laugh, not even smile. However, one could not live around Miss Jacobsen very long without learning to laugh. She undertook to teach him to laugh. She would laugh heartily, telling Ibrahim to do as she did. The effect was the weirdest expulsion of sound you ever heard. Here are a few pictures of Nellie at the Bird's Nest Orphanage. She actually went on vacation there during one of the last weeks that she was there, just to kind of take a break, and she chose to go there so she could spend time with Maria Jacobsen and the children at the orphanage. This is one of my favorite pictures. So these are amazing. They're really amazing and touching stories, but they also have practical uses. So, for example, the Hushamajian is a project which seeks to reconstruct Armenian town and village life before the genocide. And so they have a website that's full of primary sources, photographs, other documents that kind of piece together what life was like for the Armenian community in Syria and Turkey and elsewhere before and during the conflicts and the genocide. Researchers from Hushamajian and other organizations have actually used our collections, especially the photographs, to document specific groups of refugees based on, for example, the clothes that they're wearing or a certain type of hat or other types of material culture, things that they can see in the photographs. Until very recently, the Turkish government denied that a genocide had even occurred. So these are really important records that can prevent some of these official attempts to erase history. So these are just some of the Mennonites who were doing relief work in the years leading up to the creation of the Mennonite Central Committee. Some of these same people went on to assume important leadership positions with MCC. So for example, Levi Muma, who was the executive secretary of Mennonite Central Committee until he died in 1935. Alvin J. Miller, who was the director of American Mennonite Relief, the relief work in Russia that was working under the umbrella of Mennonite Central Committee. And then, of course, Ori Miller, who served with Near East Relief from 1919 to 1920. I think I will leave it there, and I am happy to answer any questions about the archives or about these stories or any of the other sources that we have related to these Mennonite relief pioneers. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I will stop sharing now.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jason. That was very interesting. So we have a question from Althea. She says, a number of years ago, I visited archives at the Goshen College and found reports I had done as a volunteer with MCC.
Mm-hmm.
Where would those documents be housed now?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the Mennonite Central Committee United States archives were housed they were housed at the archives of the Mennonite Church for a very long time. And the decision was made, I think it was in 2012 or something, to relocate. MCC decided to take back like management of the records and move them back to their headquarters in Akron. And so that's where all of the archives are now, at the Akron facility, Mennonite Central Committee facility. And so if the work that you did was related to or was with MCC as a volunteer, then that would be the first place I would check.
Great. And then Tina is wondering if you have the grandma number of the John F. Funk that you spoke about, but perhaps we can send that out in the follow-up email.
Sure. What is that? The code for the
yes, so she can find out who it was.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's on that registry, but I can send you more information about the photograph if you give me your email address.
Sure, I will make a note of who it is and we can follow up that way. Laird is asking, when was the first major Russian Mennonite emigration to Canada? And the same question for USA.
Major Russian Mennonite emigration to Canada. I think it would be in the one that happened in the 1870s and 1880s. I am not an expert on that history, but from what I know, I think that was the first major one. And I think that they were going to both. United States and Canada. Yeah, I should clarify that John Funk was not from a Russian Mennonite family. He was just a prominent Mennonite leader who had a publishing company. And so he used his connections to facilitate that, the settlement of the Russian Mennonites.
Okay, and Mervyn makes the point that grandma database is mostly for Russian Mennonites, so he might not be in there.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question that they want answered? Mervyn Horace mentions that he used to work at the Mennonite Church USA archive.
Okay. When was it?
You can type when you used to work there, Mervyn, if you want to let us know. Oh, and Mervyn also says that John F. Funk was from Franconia. Surprisingly, John F. Funk does have a grandma number, which is, oh, okay, he shares the number, even though he was not of Low German ancestry. That's from Alan Peters. We have some sleuths in the background who are looking things up as we talk. Oh, and Mervyn says he worked under Leonard Gross and Elizabeth Bauman, 1980 to 84.
Okay.
Walter Friesen is wondering if he researched the church TUMC in the Bethel archives. Is this now relocated?
I'm sorry. I think I missed the question.
He researched his church, TUMC, in the Bethel archives. Is this now relocated?
So the Bethel archives, like at Bethel College in North Newton, Kansas, Mennonite Library and Archives, their collections have not moved anywhere. The Mennonite Church USA used to own and manage the records related to the General Conference after the merger, but since I think 2018, Bethel College has owned and managed those records on their own. So Mennonite Church USA no longer owns those records.
Okay, good to know. And Ellen is wondering, Ellen Miller, if anyone has written a book about Nellie Miller Mann.
So her son, I'm forgetting his name now. Maybe somebody will type it in the comments, but her son was a pastor in the Mennonite church for a long time. And he, a number of years ago, transcribed and compiled a bunch of her letters and diaries and published them. He did a self-published book. And so a lot of those are available in the book. It's called Letters from Syria, I believe. And aside from that book, I don't know of any other works or historical works that have focused on her story. We have had researchers, as I mentioned, who've come and done research, like from the Armenian community, who have done research on Nellie Miller Mann and her work with Near East Relief.
That's great. Daniel Hostetler is noted the absence of the MMA Everence records. Where are those located?
We have the records of MMA at the archives here. So from the creation of MMA up until the early to mid 2000s, and so it's kind of a like, I think that they have most of the recent records of Everence are still at their headquarters in Goshen. But in terms of some of those older records, we would have those here at the MCUSA archives.
Okay, good to know. Verna is wondering, would records for short-term service workers for MCC also be at Akron?
Short-term service workers. Yeah, I would say anything related to MCC would be at the Akron archives.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have contact information for the archivist is Frank Peachy.
Oh, okay.
So I can provide that contact information if people are interested.
Now we have a really fun question here. Somebody is asking, what is the oddest object in the archive? Something that's really surprising.
I think the first thing that comes to my mind, the oddest object that is no longer in the archives, is actually related to the stories that I just told. George Springer, who served in Near East Relief, a lot of the men who went there would try to like collect souvenirs. They would go to like the battlefields and try to find, like, things from German uniforms, and ended up finding things like grenades and shell casings and things like that. And some of them brought them home. And George Springer apparently at one point donated a shell casing to the Mennonite Church USA archives. And it was sitting in a box for who knows how many years. And one of the archivists several years ago, the director of the archives was doing an inventory several years ago, and came across this box with basically a bomb inside of it. And she had no idea if it was live or not. And so they ended up calling the bomb squad to come and remove the shell casing. And I never heard whether or not it was live. I assume it probably wasn't live, but that was probably the strangest object that we would have and that we had in the archives.
Oh, it's a good story. Peter's asking, what was the point of view of those who objected to the Claremont Conference group? Was there any, did that group who was really pushing for change and wanting more service orientation, did that create some tension in the church back home?
I don't know a lot of the details of that story, but from what I do know, I think a lot of it had to do with the younger folks they felt kind of let down. Some of the people who were COs during World War I and ended up living in these military camps felt like the leadership of the Mennonite Church didn't do enough to support them while they were doing that work. And so they kind of came away from that experience with a not so good taste in their mouth about the leaders and what their leadership. And so that, I think that was one of the kind of origins of some of the tension. But then they also just kind of had new ideas about what the direction that the church should be taking. So they wanted more collaboration and communication between Mennonites in North America and in other places in Europe and elsewhere. At that time, it wasn't much more widespread than that. But they also, so I think they started pursuing some of these things on their own without the official blessing of the church leaders. And so I think that was a reason why they got some negative reaction. They're like, we sympathize and like the work that you're doing, but you can't just do things unilaterally without consulting or, without talking about it with the rest of the church. And so I think that they started this Claremont conference largely on their own initiative, and it wasn't an official Mennonite Church conference. And they invited Mennonite leaders from the United States to participate, but they were like, we're doing this conference and we invite some of you to come and participate if you're interested. But and so I think it was kind of a generational kind of thing, it seemed like.
Wow, that must have been quite unusual at that time. That wasn't a common thing at that time for.
No, I don't think so. And there's a lot of really interesting in correspondence in the Jacob Conrad Meyer papers around some of those discussions that were happening. He was in correspondence with all of the Mennonite leaders, Daniel Kaufman, and others who were in positions of leadership in the church, and also some of his peers who were younger, and talking about all of these issues very openly and in a lot of detail. And so they're really interesting letters to read.
Wow. Do you ever get lost in the archives just reading stuff and you're like, oh, where did the time go? Just so interested in the story.
Yeah, like having a background in history, it's I have to check my urge a lot to just get lost in something that's fascinating. Like I come across fascinating things in the archives every day. And so I think it's important for me to know my archive. And so sometimes I can use that excuse, but then also I have to say, okay, I need to come back to this later and focus on the task at hand.
You don't have a problem with Netflix binging. It's archive binging for you,
archive
right?
binging, yep.
So Ray mentions that David Mann is Nellie Mann's son. You
Yes,
knew
David
somebody in
Mann.
the crowd would know.
Mhm. Thank you.
And Sue thanks you for highlighting Nellie Miller Mann's story. A few people have asked about accessing records online. We will be sending out links in the follow-up email with links to the archives that you can look up online, including a digitized photo collection that you have.
Yes. That right now, the photographs are the main thing that we have online and accessible to the public. The goal in the next several years is to try to expand that to include documents themselves.
And there's a few people have some interest around the Armenian records and photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And are there ways that people can access those materials? Or is that when things return to in-person, they can look it up again?
Yeah, a lot of the photographs from not all, but a lot of the photos from the Nellie Miller Mann collection are available online on our Flickr site if you want to see more. There are, I'm trying to think what else. Some of the researchers who have done research on the Armenian, like on the Armenian materials in our collections, have posted photographs online as well. So like there's a lot of Nellie Miller Mann photographs. The Near East Relief Foundation has a website, and a lot of her photographs, more than I showed tonight, are available on that website. David Mann was also kind of in touch with them and working with them to provide access to a lot of the photographs that Nellie took when she was there.
Okay, that may answer a few other questions where Robert was wondering where to go to research Mennonites' work with Armenian orphans. So maybe that Near East Foundation would be the best source of information.
That would be a good one. And besides the collections we have here, I should also mention that there's some pretty substantial collections at Goshen College from folks who served with Near East Relief, but then later were members of the faculty at the college. So Silas, or on staff. So Silas Hertzler is one, and then the other was Christian Graber. They both have collections, and I think both of those include photographs as well.
Okay, that's great. Now, Peter's wondering, did the Near East Relief Group recognize that a genocide had happened? Like, would that have been in their understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of recognition in the documents that there was I mean, they didn't use the word genocide, but there was a lot of recognition that the Armenian community was experiencing persecution just because they were Armenian. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much the definition of genocide, but I don't know if that was like common terminology at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a lot of real interesting I mean, things that I might consider like anti-Muslim sentiment and things like that in the records come through as well.
Right. Janice is wondering if the archives of the Ohio Mennonite churches are in your archives.
So some of them are, some of them aren't. So we've got institutional kind of records of the Ohio Mennonite Conference. A lot of the older records for the Ohio Mennonite Conference are here, but the newer records we do not have at this point. We don't have any formal relationship with or agreement with the Ohio Mennonite Conference to manage their records, but we do have congregational collections for a lot of churches in Ohio. Most of them in kind of, I mean, some from the West Liberty area, some from the Wayne County, Holmes County area, mostly.
Dan is wondering how you organize to obtain new materials. Where does new material come from for your archives? Do you solicit it? Do you look for it? Or do people mostly donate it?
I would say since I've been here, it's mostly been donated. People that have approached the archives or approached me and asked if we'd be interested. If I hear about a collection or something that might be a good fit with our collection, it would fit with our collecting, our kind of within the parameters of our collection development policy, then I sometimes reach out to people on my own. But we're not in the position to like acquire major collections or, you know, like pay money to like acquire some rare collection or anything like that. So it's mostly people who you know that we exist as an archives and ask us if we're willing to take it.
Okay, that's great. And a few people are asking about more about what's available online. You said mostly photos, but you're working through digitizing some of your other documents. And there is a question about, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, the Mennonite Rundschau, where to find that online. I believe Conrad mentioned that in his presentation.
Oh, yeah.
That they have it in their collection. I don't know if they have it online.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any library that's digitized that yet. I know that, yeah, there would be Mennonite libraries that would have that periodical, but I don't know if anybody's digitized them yet.
Okay. Oh, and Peter's wondering, has the archives ever uploaded materials to Wikipedia Commons?
Like in terms of like actual archival documents?
Yeah.
Some of our photographs are on Wikimedia Commons, but I don't think we haven't done anything with actual archival documents. The Internet Archive is another one that we've considered, and some of like our oral history recordings are available. Just a handful of those are available there, but that's another platform that we've considered.
There's probably endless options.
Yeah.
Have to prioritize your time. And Walter is asking, you mentioned there was an early mission relief work in India. Do you have any documents from India for this?
We do have quite an extensive collection of records for Mennonite missionary and relief efforts in India. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember off the top of my head if we have stuff for those earliest years in the 1890s and 1900s, but we would have minutes from the mission committees and things that were making decisions to send people to India. And then we also have personal paper collections for some of the missionaries who served in India.
That's great. We're going to wrap up in a couple minutes here. We have a couple more questions we will answer. And then if your question was not answered, we will try and answer that by email if possible. Just before we wrap up, let's see if there's another good, strong question here. Elaine is wondering, how much would the Claremont conference and the controversy have influenced the development of the CPS in another 20 years? Maybe you can first define what CPS is.
Civilian Public Service, I assume, which was the program for conscientious objectors during World War II. I think they got the ball rolling. I don't know if there was any direct correlation or if any of the leaders at that time were like looking at that as a precedent, but I think that was one of the things that they felt like the Mennonite Church needed to do a better job at. They needed to have a unified and strong and organized voice representing Mennonite young people to the government in matters of of conscientious objection and the reasons why they were objecting to military service and coming up with alternatives. And so I think that the experience they learned from their experiences during World War I, and then kind of use those experiences to inform the decisions they made about the civilian public service program.
That's fantastic. Jason, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Nothing specific, but I am always happy to answer questions. Send me an email, give me a call. I can give you any information that you would like about our collections. And I'm committed to finding ways to providing access to people And so, yeah, that's, I can leave you with that, but feel free to get in touch.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. That was terrific. Very interesting. And you had some really great stories to share. And the photos were amazing, very evocative. Thanks again. Thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate you coming out again tonight. And there's one more presentation next week. So if you haven't signed up already in the follow-up email, you can do that. Bye now.